Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very special occasion. It is the inaugural Not the Nobel Prize 2019. It's an honor and a privilege to have you here. We are in central London, in front of a captive audience at the Arboretum, and we're also beamed live across the internet. So here in London, let's give a little cheer to the rest of the world. Very good. Yeah, there hasn't been a lot of cheering here in the United Kingdom for quite a while, as the rest of you around the world probably know why. I'm honoured to be your host. My name is Mark Dolan. I'm a comedian and broadcaster, which reflects the rather unique approach we have here at the Not the Nobel Prize. It's a special occasion. I'm here mainly sort of to conduct the conversation about different ideas for the economy. I'm also, if I'm honest, I'm mainly here because I know how to say the word arboretum correctly. That's a bit of it's Latin. I thought it was part of the body. I just somewhere near the esophagus. But it turns out it's a rather exclusive Central London members club, which itself is a great environment for free thinking and free speech and freedom of thought. Why are we here? Why are you present tonight? Well, free wine, obviously. That's. Is it not free? Well, that's economics. But I will say that we are here because global economics are in crisis, based upon, almost any test. There's a housing crisis. People have, either whether it's homelessness or a dependency on food banks, or whether it's young people not being able to get on the housing ladder and therefore have a stake in the economy. We have inequality, tax avoidance, environmental catastrophe, the scars of austerity. Can I apologize? Because Henry, the founder, asked me to make this funny, and it's difficult. But the bottom line is that the status quo is not delivering for the world and for the people, and indeed for the planet. And therefore, we exist, and our founder felt the need to create this whole enterprise because the award that this is not, which is the actual Nobel Prize for Economics, is very much there to perpetuate the status quo and these rather outmoded Anglo-Saxon ideas. And it's time for some fresh ideas, and that's why we've invited you, and that's why we're very excited to have a global international audience. On social media, you can contact us and you can contribute questions and comments. Try to keep it, polite. Any nude selfies, just direct mail them, and that'll be appreciated. Our hashtag is #NotTheNobel. So that's how you can put questions in, and that's how you can interact with us if you're watching from your laptop or your smartphone or tablet. And indeed, also in the room, I'm happy to take questions from the floor, but similarly, just tweet in any questions using the hashtag #NotTheNobel. And so, there's an awful lot going on. I mean, here in the UK, I should bring some people up to speed, because not everybody's an expert on economics, but Britain is in the process of leaving the European Union. I don't know if anyone is aware of that. It's been underreported, and this man shouted, "No, we're not. Wishful thinking, sir." So you've obviously got access to the free wine. The Brexit thing, I mean, I'm the chair, I'll be neutral. I'm not going to take sides about Brexit. I think, like a lot of people here in the UK, I'm very stressed out about it. I'm thinking of moving to Greece just to get some economic stability. That is... Okay, and I personally, I think Brexit's emotional for a lot of people. I'm very emotionally connected because my lovely wife is called Maria Rosa, and she's from Germany. She's from Munich in Bavaria, and Brexit looks like it's happening, which means she'll have to go. And probably quickly, I don't know, there'll be buses or something. Obviously, I've packed her bags just to be on the safe side and booked a cab. But the thing is, so yes, and of course the whole debate there, that Brexit, that's a mixture, isn't it? It's an economic issue, it's a political issue, it's perhaps a chunk of our society that feel disenfranchised, unheard, left out. Perhaps it happened in the United States with Donald Trump, and perhaps globally, this rise in populism is because the economics aren't working. Well, that's a suggestion, a question. It's up to yourselves, the panel, and the ultimate choice of winner to really clarify. But those are the issues we'll be talking about tonight, because it's all about economic pluralism. The Nobel Prize in Economics, the actual official prize, is 50 years old. It began in 1969 and it was handed out by the King of Sweden. And Alfred Nobel, the creator of the whole Nobel Prize platform, was against it, didn't want it to happen. And indeed, his descendants want it scrapped. Now, we're very collaborative here at Not the Nobel. I don't think necessarily that has to happen, but what we'd like to do is provide a voice which is about the alternative, not protecting the status quo, because I'm afraid to say that the success rates of the official Nobel Prize in terms of the economic ideas that have been propounded has been rubbish at best. And we can actually give you some specific examples because we've done some homework here. First of all, it's not and has never been diverse. So far, there have been 80 awards handed out. One female, isn't that good? That's encouraging, isn't it? One female, and that was Eleanor Ostrom in 2009, and 2 non-white males. So 78 white men have been winning this award since its inception, and perhaps following Anglo-Saxon ideas for how to run the economy. And the issue with the Nobel Prize is it has this veneer of respectability, this sort of scientific sort of guise, which gives it prestige and weight and power. But as we've said, that's all well and good if those ideas are delivering for populations, but clearly they're not. It seems more quite often to prop up the rich and powerful. Let me give you some examples. It's important not to make this a knee-jerk emotional thing, but rather a few facts. In 2018, William Nordhaus was the winner, and that's only last year. And his economic models have been linked to the delaying of action on climate change. So that's obviously not great, and there's a case to answer there. In 1997, Robert Merton and Myron Scholes were the joint winners, and quite literally less than a calendar year later, their hedge fund had to be bailed out at a cost of $3.6 billion. Less than a year. So there you go. And finally, James Mirrlees, he was a winner in 1996, and his work contributed to the lowering of taxes on the super rich. So, I'm sure that, a stop clock is right, twice a day. So I'm sure there have been worthy winners as well. But we are here, as I said, for that. We're in the era of the internet and of a hopefully very democratic world, certainly in terms of opinion. And we feel that needs to happen in the economic space. And that's why we exist. So we now get to the meat and two veg of it. This is really, I think, a fantastic quote about where we're at with our economy. And it's from the FT editor-at-large, the Financial Times editor-at-large, Gillian Yett, who was quoted as saying, "Most societies have an elite who try to stay in power, and they do not merely do this by controlling the means of production and the money. They do it by controlling the cognitive map, the way we think." Well, we are here at economicpluralism.org, the Mint magazine, and hashtag Not the Nobel Prize, to redraw the map. We are here to create a platform for new, exciting ideas for our society and for our economy. So it's very, very exciting indeed. We have got an esteemed panel who I'm about to introduce, a lovely live event, and we're in this gorgeous venue. I would like to thank a few interested groups. First of all, our sponsors who support the whole project of economicpluralism.org. So can we give it up for our sponsors? They're fantastic. And they've paid for the venue and some of the food and also my recent dental work. Now, okay. So we are now, ladies and gentlemen, in a very exciting position, which is that it is time to introduce our wonderful panel. And so in no particular order except the physical order on this stage tonight, our first panelist, who is here to give you an overview on the nominees for this year's prize. There are 7 nominees. If you're nominated and you're in the room, make some noise. There you go, right, that's it, very good. There's a couple of them, very awkward if the winner isn't here and is somewhere else, that's going to be awkward. But thank you very much for being here tonight, great to have you. Our excellent panelists are as follows. Maya Goodfellow, writer, researcher and academic, has written for the New York Times, The Guardian, The New Statesman, Independent, Al Jazeera and many other esteemed titles, and the author of Hostile Environment, How Immigrants Became Scapegoats. Maya Goodfellow, ladies and gentlemen. Hostile Environment, How Immigrants Became Scapegoats. Maya, tell us what motivated you to write that book?
So, interestingly, it wasn't Brexit. I think a lot of people think that when Brexit happened, everything got worse in Britain and things that hadn't existed before were now at the forefront of the conversation. And when that happened, it made me quite frustrated because what I actually thought was that a lot of these things that we saw with Brexit had long existed in British society. So the way that immigrants were talked about during that referendum, they had long been talked about in really, really negative ways. And so I think the roots for things like Brexit and the discourse around it are really deep-seated in the UK. And one of the other reasons that I wrote the book, which is out, by the way, on the 5th of November,
Such a capitalist.
I have to plug it, is that something that you mentioned before about people feeling left behind as a reason why you see some of these things happening like Brexit or like Trump. Although I think there's some truth to that, and there are groups of people who are certainly being left behind, I actually think it's slightly more complicated than that, because if we fix the economics of society, if we make things fairer, racism and anti-immigration sentiment doesn't disappear. So these things, although I think inequality can breed these things, that isn't the only thing that is producing, for instance, racism. And so actually we need to be thinking about some of the other discourses that exist in society that are connected to the economy, but are not just going to be fixed by fixing the economy. So I think it's actually multi-layered, and the economy plays a role, but actually it's also just our understanding of what race is, how race functions, that is connected to capitalism. But if you get rid of capitalism, which I don't think is going to happen anyway, you don't get rid of racism. So I think we actually need to, part of the impetus for writing the book is challenging some of those ideas.
Actually, does that anti-immigrant sentiment and the scapegoating, does that make, in fact, the race element a bit of a red herring when it comes to conversations about economics?
Well, I think that there's some truth to the idea that people dislike immigration because they feel like they are being hard done by, and immigrants are are taking jobs or taking from the welfare state, which isn't accurate. It's not true. But I also think one of the big problems with that narrative is we have often heard politicians talk about the working class, or the white working class in particular in the UK, as being the people that dislike immigration. Actually, although Brexit was not just driven by anti-immigration feeling, it was a significant part of that vote. And lots of wealthy people in the south of England also voted for Brexit, also dislike immigration. And so the thing that I would ask us all to do is every time we see journalists go around, and I mean, I'm sure, you know, a lot of us are guilty of doing things that we now would regret, but if we ask journalists why they go to certain places to do their vox pops, why is it that they go to Doncaster to do their vox pops and not to wealthy parts of like Surrey, right? To ask people what they think about immigration, I think that would actually probe us to like problematize that narrative about it being just an economic issue. Because if it was just an economic issue, why is Jacob Rees-Mogg the person that he is? Why is Boris Johnson at the forefront of some of that anti-immigration sentiment? It's never been the case. You've always had people who have been incredibly wealthy, who've been the architects of some of the most pernicious discourses in our society. Race was created in Britain as it exists now by the elite, and it was filtered through society. And so yes, you know, people can think for themselves, and it's not just a top-down thing. But we have to recognise how the elite also have a role to play in spreading some of these discourses.
And I guess we've seen that in America, where the current incumbent at the White House uses race as a sort of divisive tool to gain power and hang on to it. Interesting stuff. Our next panellist is Sally Uren, OBE. So just take note, panellists. This is letters after her name. She's been on her knees in front of the Queen, haven't we all? But Sally is Chief Executive of Forum for the Future, which is a fantastic organisation that over the last 20 years has been working in partnership with business, governments and civil society to accelerate the shift towards a sustainable future, which I guess is what we're trying to do here, actually. So tell us a little bit about the organisation and your role.
So Forum for the Future, we are here to try and accelerate progress towards sustainable development. And that means that I spend my time coercing, cajoling, not usually threatening, but maybe sometimes edging over into that territory, organisations and whole sectors to really get serious about what it means to be sustainable. And I'm not an economist, just put that out there. I'm actually a scientist by training, but it's very clear to me that one of the biggest barriers and the biggest areas of our system that we need to rethink is economics, because until we do that, we are not going to deliver sustainable development.
Fantastic. Well, we can all drink to that one. Our final panellist is Matt Leach, who is Chief Executive of Local Trust. Now, this is a place-based funder supporting communities to achieve their ambitions. Matt has had a glittering career. He was former CEO of HACT, Social Housing Sector's Ideas and Innovation Agency. So, Matt, you're used to thinking outside the box, if you'll forgive the hackneyed cliche, about lots of things. Tell us a little bit about Local Trust and what you do there.
Well, I feel a bit of a fraud sitting in front of an audience of economists and trying to talk about economics by knowing very little about it. And I found one of the best things about being invited onto this panel was getting a bit of a kick out the backside to move away from the Twitter feed and go to a bookshop and find out about what this stuff was. So I went down to Waterstones a couple of days ago to have a look for some of the books written by some of the finalists, and I found that the economics section was right next to sci-fi and fantasy, which kind of felt right. But what's interesting about economics, I guess, for me, is the extent to which, for the communities I work with, and Local Trust is an interesting organisation. We've put £1.1 million into each of 150 left-behind communities across the United Kingdom. So communities often on the periphery of towns or cities who've maybe missed out on funding in the past, perhaps have lost jobs because of the collapse of industry. And what we did in 2012 was go into each of those with a lot of lottery money and say, here's £1 million. You can do whatever you want with it over 10 to 15 years. All you've got to do as a community is come together, generate shared plans, and then spend it on making your places better places to live. And it's an incredible experiment, I guess, in seeing what UBI works, how UBI might work, but on a community basis, and the way that when you allow communities to take risks and you allow people who maybe have been excluded by the economy, who are poor, to take risks, something that they're never allowed to do, how their imagination kind of can set them free, how you can take people from being constant supplicants, applicants, complainants, and turn them into people who can negotiate with those who hold power and make a difference. But I think when I go to talk to people in those communities, and it's a privilege kind of being able to go to places where you would never go, because why would you go there? There's no businesses, there's no shops, there are no fantastic libraries or museums, and you talk to them about what's influencing the world around them. They would look at you blankly if you talked about the work of Steve Keen, which is fantastic. Or indeed, Kate has talked a lot about some of the issues, that underpin the problems that they face. But they would look at you blankly because economics means nothing to them as a practice. It's not relevant. And I think for me, where this award really gets to the heart of the matter is trying to find a way in which economics can be relevant, and it's fantastic to be part of that.
Well, yes. I mean, is this a crisis of capitalism, or is it a little more location specific from nation to nation, do we think?
I think it's a crisis of culture. We did some research we published a couple of weeks ago, which looked at the relationship between community life or the experience of communities and whether they have places to meet, libraries, pubs, nightclubs, community centres, whether they have civic life. So are there organisations that bring people together, and how connected are they to other places? And what we found was that those unconnected places where there's nowhere that brings people in them together themselves, and whether there aren't the organisations to mobilise them, suffer much worse social outcomes than other equally deprived places. And typically these are the white dominant, 85, 90% white working class or former working class areas on the periphery. And if you break down the Brexit vote, what you find is the correlation between voting Brexit ward by ward and whether you've got places to meet, whether you've got civic institutions to bring people together, and whether you're connected to other places, is 3 times stronger than economic factors. People talk a lot about Brexit being something about the economy, about jobs, about migration. But overwhelmingly, I think it's a reaction to the way in which modern life has stripped away a lot of what it is to be a community and to be an individual in a place. And I think what's interesting about this award is the way that it celebrates some people who are trying to unpick that complexity, that kind of boundary between the social economic, and try and make a bit more sense of it.
Well, I think it's interesting you should say that, Matt, because let's take a look at our first finalist, and it's Jessica Gordon-Nembhard. And she's been nominated for pioneering research into the role of cooperatives in economics, which is very much the theme that you've just touched on. Do you have thoughts on Jessica's work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that actually she's drawing on Du Bois as well, which I mean, I think is always a good thing to be doing. I think thinking about how, because she's looking at African American communities in particular, right? And I think that this also should encourage us to think about the way the economy is not only classed, but it's raced. So if you, for instance, look at the UK, if you look at what happened with austerity, it was women of colour who've been the hardest hit of any group by austerity, right? Which you wouldn't know from a lot of our public debate, because that is almost entirely erased. And so I think what she's doing here is really, really interesting in terms of looking back at histories that exist, the things we can learn from, and thinking about how the way we organise ourselves economically is not just about cold, hard money, is not just about this kind of individualistic, so-called rational sense of understanding the economy, which is what a lot of neoclassical economics is based on, but is thinking about ideas of openness, solidarity, people being equal with one another. So how can we knit in these ideas of solidarity, of working along one another for social justice at a local level for some kind of positive economic change as well? I think marrying the two together, to me, seems to be a really, really positive thing to do.
It sounds, doesn't it, Sally, like the opposite of globalism, this particular thesis?
Well, in some ways, it is, but I would really question what do we mean by globalism, because I think that's one of those terms like capitalism that's bandied around and people feel very clever when they say it, but actually it means lots of different things.
Well, is it big companies with just too much market share?
I'm not
and
sure.
And therefore power?
So I think, for me, part of what we need to do if we're going to reimagine the economic system is to start by checking some of our assumptions. And big doesn't necessarily mean powerful. Big can mean you've actually got no power at all. And I think there is a really interesting question, which is, in the decade we have in front of us, the 2020s, where we know we have got to solve for the climate emergency, the biodiversity emergency, or at least put in place the bricks of those solutions, do we have time to completely overturn capitalism? And George Monbiot talks about the fact, of course, if we solve for climate, we have to overthrow capitalism. And I worry that within this period of a decade, have we really got time to do that? And so I think we probably haven't. And so for me, it's a question of how can we rethink capitalism so it works for sustainable development? And so that's not a conversation of you're big and you're powerful, you're small and you're not. It's actually, how do we bring the different systems together and understand where the leverage points are to really affect big change? And we say that, the health system is broken, the food system is broken. Those systems are not broken at all. They are working perfectly well in the pursuit of short-term profit maximization and GDP. And actually, unless we rethink the goals of the system and then realign the actors in the system to deliver those goals, we're not going to find a solution. So for me, it's not a question of, are the big businesses exerting too much power? Do they not care? Actually, the question for me is, what are the goals of the system that we need to be going towards delivering that simultaneously deliver social and economic, positive, environmental even impacts?
Well, that's fantastic. Well, I hope that you've all got lots of questions and thoughts, and most importantly, your valuable votes. So if you're either here in the room at the Arboretum, or if you are watching somewhere else on the planet, then do please engage. The website is economicpluralism.org, and that's how you'll be able to place your votes in a couple of minutes' time. And just for those present here today in central London, do make sure you jump on the Wi-Fi so that you're able to tweet comments and questions in, and also that you're able to vote in a few minutes. And if you select Arboretum on your smartphone or laptop, and then you'll see that the password is greenlounge1, all lowercase. So whilst we've seen there from Jessica Gordon-Nembhard the idea of actually looking to history for some brilliant ideas about economic cooperation, how about Kate Raworth, who has been developing the idea of donut economics, which balances essential human needs and planetary boundaries. So
Bring it on, is what
yeah.
I'd say. Completely.
What do you perceive her to mean by this? Could you give those the uninitiated a slight overview on what she's saying?
Well, I suppose at its most straightforward is the current economic system is geared towards GDP and is therefore fostering a whole set of behaviours by particularly the business community that is in pursuit of short-term profit maximisation.
Mm-hmm.
And at the moment, I've gone a bit quieter. Is that deliberate, I wonder?
It's censorship.
I wasn't about to be rude. But at the moment, we have an economic system that doesn't pay any attention to the value of natural resources or to the intrinsic value of the social cohesion upon which we rely upon.
Yeah.
So decisions are made on purely economic terms. And great quote, if nature was a bank, we would have bailed it out a long time ago. Equally for the cohesion of some of the communities upon which they're the bedrock of our society. And so this notion of pure single linear economic growth is completely flawed, because actually we are intrinsically reliant on the natural resources around us. We are intrinsically reliant on the connections and the empathy that we form as humans, and yet our economic system kind of operates in isolation of both of those.
Okay.
And so for me, donut economics is a really valiant attempt of bringing in these broader dimensions of progress, of flourishing, of vibrancy, regeneration into the economic construct.
Very, very good. Now, we are getting very close to the opportunity to vote. So if you want to do that, I can clarify that themintmagazine.com is your best portal for that. If you're on economicpluralism.org, just go to the drop-down menu and select not the Nobel Prize, but mintmagazine.com. Jump on there. We're about to vote very, very shortly. Do we think, one question, I suppose, and climate change is going to be a recurring theme. Is there any hope that capitalism can be the solution rather than the cause of it?
So it's funny, I teach at SOAS, or I did until last year, and this was something that we did a week on climate change, and all the students were so overwhelmed by how bad everything was. Like SOAS, which tends to be pretty radical in our thinking, a lot of the students left the classroom saying, maybe capitalism is just going to self-correct, because what else do we do when things are so bad? Maybe it is the solution. And I think actually it's not. I think actually the way we often talk about climate change is not enough is being done. And actually the reality is a lot is being done, it's just the wrong things are being done. If you look at the UK, the UK in the whole of Europe spends the most subsidising the fossil fuel industry, £10.5 billion a year. And so if we think about that in comparison to how much we put into renewables and the way we even talk about the environment, I think we can see a huge, huge problem there. And so actually, I think what is really interesting about this proposal is reorienting the way we even understand the economy. Like, what is the economy for? And it's not just about growth, consistently chasing economic growth. To what end? We need to think about the fact that it's extractive capitalism that has produced the climate crisis. It has produced it. We've known for decades that climate change is happening, and it was the fossil fuel industry in different places that managed to stop government from doing things in particular instances. And so I think we have to understand that, but we also have to recognize that how it is colonial logics that are at play too. So it is this idea, actually, if you look at who are the bigger emitters, who are the countries that are going to bear the brunt of climate change when they aren't emitting as much, this is this idea that is whiteness knitted into the idea of the economy, right? So it's this idea that it is certain civilized people who know how to control the economy, they know how to extract from the environment in the right way, they know how to control the environment around them, and they are the people who are going to be able to come up with the best innovative solutions, they're going to come up with the best ideas of progress. And so what we have to do is recognize that we're part of the environment. We don't control it, we are part of it. The environment is something we live in and we contribute to. And so this very notion that we can control the environment around us by continuing to extract and continuing to abuse the planet in the way that we are, which is rooted in ideas of colonialism, it came from colonialism, I think is something that we have to challenge. And to do that, I think it's really important to be talking about what do human beings need, what does the planet need, and that should be our starting point for how we structure our economy. So I think this is a really interesting, this particular proposal is particularly interesting for that.
Well, definitely, it looks like a lot of, the roots of capitalism, particularly in relation to the environment, the arrival of agriculture and, this very industrialized form of farming, which has been quite an assault on the earth. Let's take a look at Laura Carvalho, who's nominated for bringing economic debates to the people.
I thought that was, it's probably of all the finalists, she was the finalist that I was least familiar with, and perhaps that's because largely she's been talking to a Brazilian audience. But I think what's really interesting about Laura in comparison to the other nominees, all of whom are fantastic, was the extent to which she was reaching across boundaries and democratizing conversations about economics. I think to an extent, actually, Kate's work has been interesting as well in terms of its accessibility. And I think that's something that we need to think about, because one of the challenges of economists is the way collectively you lot, have set yourselves apart as a particularly special sect, talking to one another and honing your charts and your equations, whatever they mean, and in ways which influence how we all experience the planet, how we all experience our communities, but are largely inaccessible and non-contestable. And I think the notion of opening up that debate and allowing ordinary people who are receiving the impact of big decisions, whether they're decisions by government or by business, to challenge is an incredibly, an important service to the world. And certainly it was the panelists who I wanted to find out most about. Unfortunately, most of it's in Brazilian, and I don't speak Portuguese.
I think she was also the one, if I'm remembering right, she was also the one that said increase taxes on the wealthy. So I was like, this is automatically going to get my vote. Tax the rich. It's like, who's going to disagree?
It'll never happen. Okay, well, let's hope it does. Let's take a look at, in the limited time we have left, Mariana Mazzucato for reimagining the role of the state and value in the economics. What does she mean by that, Maya?
I really like Mariana Mazzucato's work. I think what she does is she challenges this logic that the private is best, the private sector is best, and the private is good by virtue of it being private. And she basically turns that on its head and says so many of the things that happen in the private sphere, so many of the technological developments, a lot of that comes from state-led investment into research, right? Yeah. So I think it challenges one of the fundamental lies that has been perpetuated for decades, that the state doesn't do anything good, it doesn't produce any value, workers don't produce value, and that it's the private that is king or queen. I think what she does really, really, really well in a very accessible way is really challenges that very idea.
And of course, the bottom line is there are some very valuable things that we need as a society which don't really contain a profit, and that's probably where the state steps in.
Well, you can see why she's in demand. I think she didn't make it today because she's presumably flying off somewhere else to counsel some government. As a former civil servant, I found it immensely comforting stuff, because it made me feel that the first half of my career wasn't entirely futile. And if you kind of look at the various finalists, you've certainly got people doing economics as metaphor. So we've got donuts, and we've got illness and sickness, and this felt like economics as therapy. It was a there to the state. You helped create the iPhone, therefore you're capable of an awful lot more. And I think that's quite important, because certainly when you're experiencing government as a micro level in a community that's on the end of spending cuts, on the end of the withdrawal of the state. In some ways, that's a symptom of the state giving up, feeling that it's fundamentally futile to try to do what it was set up to do. So I think as a contribution towards a positive view of what government can do, it's fantastic. It was the book that I read fastest and with most enthusiasm.
Wow, that's quite a ringing endorsement. I have 3 more finalists for you in as many minutes, really. Randall Wray, developing a new theory of money. Randall Wray is one of the pioneers of modern monetary theory, MMT, which challenges mainstream economic ideas about currency, debt, and inflation. What were your thoughts, Sally?
Well, I have to be really honest here because I'm not an economist, and of all of the entries, this is the one that I found the hardest to really understand, if I'm perfectly honest. So I'm not going to take any more airtime and waste your time with a vapid answer.
Did you not find, something that worries me about it, it all seemed very exciting stuff, as another way of saying you don't have to accept austerity, you don't have to accept spending cuts. But what worried me slightly about the entire MMT thing, and I'm getting ready for my Twitter stream to be bombarded by abuse here, was that it seemed to be shooting out another unquestionable orthodoxy to go up against the rest. And there seems to be a cult of people, or at least as bad as some of the other cults that we've had, who say that this provides all the answers. And I think, very few sensible people would suggest that anybody in any discipline have all the answers. So the notion that if only you understood MMT theory properly, then you would understand that this or that was true, fundamentally scares me.
And
I don't think I also think he'll probably get most of the votes because there's a lot of people who like that stuff.
But I think just building on that, we do a lot of work at Forum trying to understand, what are the ways of a systems thinker? In other words, how can you kind of rewire your brain to think in systems and to think about understanding connections between health and food and energy and climate, and then solving for some of these big challenges. And one of the ways of a systems thinker, and this will really upset you economists, I'm sorry, is to accept that all models are wrong. Some are just more useful than others.
Or some are less wrong, maybe. It's interesting because MMT has been linked to the Green New Deal, which might be worth reflecting on when you make your considerations. Remember, the Mint magazine is the website you need to go to place your vote very, very shortly indeed. 2 more for you, 2 more luminaries. Steve Keen for predicting the global financial crisis and improving financial models. Steve is the author of Debunking Economics, a trenchant critique of conventional neoclassical economics, such as the efficient market hypothesis. So, what do we reckon, Sally?
I really like Steve Keen's work, and you're on Twitter quite a bit, and every now and again you step in and say something really sensible, rather than sort of...
Steve is with us tonight.
Yeah, so I've not met you, and I think I was having a real argument on Twitter, which is really, don't do that. Somebody was basically saying I was just kidding myself if I thought that sustainable development was possible within the current construct, and I do think it is. And I think you stepped in and you probably don't remember, but you basically mediated, and you kind of brought a thoughtful economic frame to what was an increasingly polarized discussion, which can happen with sustainable development. And for me, your economics is sensitive and thoughtful, and we need more of that, please.
Okay, brilliant. Another ringing endorsement. And finally, last but certainly not least, Tom Rippin for creating a community of social entrepreneurs working towards a healthy economy. You see, now that's an interesting expression, Maya, social entrepreneur. So perhaps it could detoxify the idea of capitalism if it's for a social good.
Yeah, I mean, I think trying to think about how we inject this society and how we think about the way we interact with one another as not just being about economic relations, but how it is also about our social relations that are embedded in a broader economic structure is probably helpful. And that maybe also thinking about the question that came before about MMT as well is part of this. Like for me, quite a bit of this that we've been talking about is also just we need better economic literacy. It's basically what Ha-Joon Chang says, right? Is that we all need to understand economics better, and part of the reason we don't, no offense to any economists in the room, it's very important, it's very difficult, but it's also the language that is used, right? And how alienating that can be. So I think finding ways to communicate to people how the economy functions in ways that we can all understand and not making it this kind of this thing that is fenced off from the rest of society unless you're an economist or unless you have the right lingo is really helpful and important.
Fantastic.
Can
Sally?
I just say what I loved about your approach is that you take that systems thinking and apply it to this particular issue. And quite honestly, one of the reasons we're in the mess that we're in is that we try and solve for our messy, complicated world using linear methodologies and linear thinking. And you took that system analogy, and we need to understand the economic system as an integrated part of an interlocking set of systems. And until we do that, we are not going to drive the change that we need to see.
Well, there you are. Well, we are here to provide a platform for that change, and the inherent nature of it is democratic. And actually, you know, more than one of the finalists has stressed the importance of A, maybe looking at history, and B, listening to the people. And maybe the solution is from the ground up. But whatever the solution is, or solutions, plural, they will hopefully be achieved with this platform. That's what we're here to do. We've had 5 decades of the Nobel Prize for Economics, and here's where we are. So I wonder whether it's time for some other opinions. Now, we have no vested interest at all. We just have your votes. And therefore, please jump on the Mint Magazine website, if you can, and cast your vote. And similarly, if you're watching online around the world, again, it's wonderful to have your company. You are also invited, please, to make your vote. We'll give you a couple of minutes just to action that. It's a very intuitive platform via the Mint Magazine. Yes. Well, let me give you a microphone, because it would be nice. So hopefully you've all got the messaging there. Just get voting now, please. And thank you very much for your question, sir. Go for it.
It's a really boring, prosaic question, I'm afraid. Planners might have no plan B for how to cope. But at the moment, the internet's not working, so do we have a plan B for how to get on?
Oh, dear.
So you're struggling a bit with we're having a bit of trouble with the internet here at Arboretum. Is that right? Okay. Well, what we might have to do in the room is a show of hands. I wonder if that's going to be an option, an analog solution. But could you raise your hands if you have not been able to vote yet in the room? Okay, a few, yeah, maybe a third of you. So perhaps we can offer some help. Maybe, I don't know, we should have a ballot box or something. How about that? Well, in seriousness, I wonder whether we might be able to distribute some sheets, and you could just scribble down the name, because I would say there are perhaps just maybe 10 people who haven't been able to vote. Well done, everyone else, for managing to do it. Apologies for the Wi-Fi issues we've had. And I really want to thank the panel whilst we gather the votes and also create a solution there for those few disenfranchised people. Are there any comments, actually, from the floor that you'd like to make? Because we've listened to the panel. Yes, sir, I'm going to head over to the back. Thank you very much. Sir, it's all yours.
Thank you. Dr. Gordon Macmillan from the NHS, and great supporter of the role of the state in furthering social outcomes and more meaningful response. My question for the panel is quite topical. I've been interested in the panelists' perspective on the Extinction Rebellion spraying the Treasury with blood.
Interesting. Thank you very much for your question.
It went a bit wrong.
Extinction Rebellion. You've actually been very helpful to raise that, because that's another pocket of our community, a growing one, that feels or has felt like it's not being listened to, and it's in relation to the climate issues we have. What do we think about that kind of direct action?
I mean, I think it's really necessary when we're at a stage where governments are not listening. I mean, I was actually at the climate protests a few weeks ago in central London, and it was like overwhelmingly like 16, I felt so old, it was like 15, 16-year-olds, and it was really, really great to see so many people out on the streets. But I think it's fine for people to be engaging in this kind of non-violent direct action when governments aren't listening, and when people aren't being heard, and the policy changes that need to happen aren't happening. And I also think there's a message there as well, which Extinction Rebellion haven't actually always been great at. I think they need to also make sure they have I think they're trying to do this, but a more sophisticated understanding of climate change. and thinking about the impact on who it's impacting right now, although we're all going to be affected, it is indigenous communities all around the world who have actually been locked out of climate discussions in the past, who have not been heard when they've raised concerns for decades. And so it is those people who are either going to have to move or really suffer the consequences. People are now having to move because of agricultural changes within regions across the world. And that just isn't getting the coverage in the way that it needs to, because it's exactly what Black Lives Matter say. The climate crisis is also a racial crisis. This is about race as well.
But this is it's also about access to resources and influence, which goes, cuts right across communities. So if you were to look at the communities that are in the UK that are most likely to suffer or find the transition from a carbon to a post-carbon economy the toughest, they're those communities, particularly in Yorkshire and Humberside in the northeast of England, that suffered most and haven't recovered from the transition from an industrial to a post-industrial economy. So when we start to think about solutions, absolutely, it's interesting to find out what that headline was about. Protesters lose control of blood hose was all I saw on the news. But when you're looking at people living lives in communities that are still struggling to cope with one great economic change and dislocation, we urgently need, as well as protesting on the side, we need some real answers for how we're going to help people move on to the next way of living. I know, and it's something that Forum is very focused on.
We're doing a lot of work on this. So, I think could say it would help. Extinction Rebellion, I didn't see the headline. I've been actually out of London all day today, which doesn't mean you don't see headlines, but I've just been doing other stuff. But I think they have a really important role to play in raising awareness, and I think that has been so powerful over the last few months. And it's symptomatic of what we need to see more of, which is people need to be part, particularly of the climate emergency conversation. So for too long, we've talked about technological solutions to climate, investment solutions, and the people have been missing. And actually, Extinction Rebellion have brought the person back into this conversation, but that's not enough. We need to really focus on this notion of a just transition, because actually just switching off our oil and gas is definitely what we need to do, but we have to do it with people at the heart. And I was lucky enough last week, and the irony is not lost of me, I flew to New York to go to Climate Week. I didn't get a boat. However, it was a really important moment because there's lots going on there, but one of the most encouraging things I heard was the governor of New Mexico launching a $60 million fund for oil and gas workers to make that transition, and we don't hear enough about that. So we absolutely have got to be much better at putting people at the heart of this debate, and people in least developed countries who, as you say, actually they're already impacted and are just not part of the conversation at the moment.
Okay, yeah. What last comment, perhaps?
Well, I would just really quickly say it's true that thinking about just transition, and one of the most frustrating things over the past few years is Parliament voting through the third runway at Heathrow, which actually you can have a way of creating jobs for people in a sustainable way that doesn't mean we're going to be not only increasing emissions, but also making the communities around Heathrow, who are often poorer, even suffer the consequences even more of air pollution, not to mention noise pollution. So like thinking about what's going on in our city right now and who is suffering. I live in Newham, which is one of the most polluted boroughs in the country. And this is the impact that this has on young children growing up in that borough is huge. So I think actually demanding more from our government now is integral, because they're going ahead with policies that are just so damaging for the environment right now.
Okay, and with the clock against us, I will take a couple of last comments, sir.
Yes, I was just thinking that you might want to go back to the original question, which is about pouring blood over the Treasury building. If that had been a right-wing organisation and they'd furthermore done this with a swastika, I'd imagine there would be a great deal of upset in this room and probably many other places as well. Should we not be careful, particularly in the rather highly sensitised environment that we're in at the moment, before we start pouring blood all over the place?
How is blood equivalent to swastika, though? Sorry.
I'm saying that you were rushing off and saying what a wonderful thing it was to protest.
I've made up my mind about
I'm
something.
saying that the actual way in which the protest was carried out leaves something to be desired.
I think going back to some of the original conversations we had here, in lots of communities, the central state is so distant to their experience of life. in terms of what they can buy, the decisions they can make, the opportunities they have, that the fact that someone poured paint over it or not will be largely irrelevant to they're going through the day. Sadly, in many communities, actually, their experience of engaging with the local state is equally distant. But both of those institutions are making a whole load of decisions that impact quite significantly on their lives. And I think one of the interesting things about this prize, certainly in its first year, is the number of people, the number of nominees who've tried to find ways to bridge that distance. Because people should care about the fact that the Treasury is seen as a place of dispute rather than a place of engagement. And they should feel that they're invested in it in some way.
Okay. Well, I can tell you now that we have 1 minute until voting closes. Thanks again online for making your votes. They're coming through thick and fast. 1 more minute to go before we close voting. If you have manually voted today, thank you for doing that. If you have not manually voted and you have not electronically voted, we seem to have the Wi-Fi up and running again. So if you want to give it one more go, that would be greatly appreciated. Very helpful questions and comments, particularly because they raise the question of democracy, which is a word that we haven't used hitherto. And we're definitely, capitalism as a concept is under the lens at the moment and in question. But how about democracy itself? And of course, if you have direct action, that's challenging some democratic principles, perhaps, or is it a very good example of democracy? Good question. The rule of law. Final comment from you, sir.
Sure, thank you. So my observation is this. I think the problem with current thinking on economics is that it's based on one fundamental premise of economies of scale, i.e. let's make more stuff and that therefore each unit is cheaper and that's better for all of us. I think the flaw in that is when you make more stuff, you have to somehow figure out where to keep it. There are additional risks in terms of making more stuff into the environment. There's the more you do, the more maintenance you have to do to keep that system in place, and the cost of keeping that system in place is significant. And all of those risks are not factored into the current system. And those are the issues that are causing economic distress, and for folks to think immigration is the problem because we're all interconnected. And I can talk about it for ages, but I don't have a lot of time.
But that was, again, really helpful input from all of our guests here today, and indeed our wonderful panel. I'd like to ask now for a round of applause for our amazing panel this evening, who have had to navigate a lot of complex material. Maya, Sally, and Matt have really engaged so much with what this first Not the Nobel Prize event has been all about. The biggest thing is our winner, of course, and they may be here, they may be somewhere else in the world. We'll try to connect with whoever it is that you've chosen as the person whose ideas were the most inspiring. So what I will do is once again thank everyone for being here, and I'm happy now to introduce the man behind this whole project, who, by the way, has just sent me a WhatsApp very excitedly with an enthusiastic exclamation mark, which is that we had 1,000 votes, which is phenomenal. Phenomenal engagement. We've hit 3 figures, and well, 4, isn't it? I'm not an economist. Ladies and gentlemen, to announce the winner of the inaugural Not the Nobel Prize 2019, please welcome the founder of the Mint magazine and the founder and CEO of Promoting Economic Pluralism, Henry Lucen-Gore.
Thank you very much. I have to say, I have to immediately disappoint you because we haven't got the winner yet, because we're just closing votes now with a slight technical, it's always the technical glitches that get us, isn't it? We thought it was going so smooth. We were told that everyone would be able to vote, wonderful Wi-Fi and so forth. But, it's all live. It's live. So I've just got to wait while Nat sort of calculates the final things. So I might just use this opportunity to really thank everyone for being here and being part of what I think is a crucial movement to open up what economics is about. And I think that the panel have really got that this is why we've chosen a panel who are not economists, because we wanted to make it clear that what is important, economics matters to everyone. It matters to all of us, and it's being turned into this technical, mathematized, sort of exotic thing that people do in some strange place. But it all affects us, and that is really what this is all about. This is why we've gone out to people to get them to vote, to them to nominate, them to be involved, because that's where we need to go. It's got serious, hasn't it? Life has got serious. Suddenly we were all swimming along, it was all seemed to be fine. Now it's serious. The future looks pretty dire. And unless we get hands-on, unless we start thinking about it, unless we start working on it, it's going to go really bad. And so we want to bring economics to people to think about and get involved in. Because if we keep organising our economy like we have in the past, it's just not going to work. So I hope that was a serious bit. That was really serious, wasn't it? Thank you. Sorry, that was serious. So it's great to have you involved. And now, hey, that was good timing. I just about wrapped that up in time for the winner. Now, I don't know who the winner is. And actually, looking at the votes and so forth, it was very close. Very, very close. And actually, of course, this prize is not about the winner. The winner, it's not really about... We thought, well, let's do something that engages, that's fun, that people can relate to. But in the end, it doesn't really matter. It's about actually people getting involved, thinking, getting engaged with these questions. Having said all that, I'm now going to announce the winner. So can you just hold that moment? Because I can't actually take that. That's great. Thanks very much. And hold that so I can sort of speak into it. Thank you very much. You see, it's all improvised as we go.
This is my life now.
It's all great. Yeah. So now I can pull out, it's quite a smart envelope. We said we'd have a smart envelope. I was wondering, should we have this sort of, we don't have the background music to sort of, and the winner is, thank you, background music, big moment, who is it? Mariana Mazzucato. Well, that is amazing. That is fantastic. But Mariana couldn't be here because, as she says, she's traveling around the world trying to convert everyone to the fact that governments can do stuff and governments represent people. People can do stuff. So it's really exciting that... and now, Henry, my namesake, can you come forward? We have a representative here who is going to receive the medal. We have a medal. I don't know if you've seen on... can I... ask you, thank you very much.
This is my life now.
You've been really important in this whole thing. Okay, that's it. So we have a medal, and I'd just like to show everyone the medal. It's got our logo, not the Nobel Prize on it, and it's white. And why is it white? Because of the mint. So I'd like to present this to Henry Lee, are you able to say a few words?
Indeed.
Oh, brilliant. Let's give you the microphone. And you've got the leaflet. That's
Yes,
great.
I do. Would you mind holding the medal for me?
This is collaboration in real. It doesn't work with individuals.
It's a real shame that Mariana Mazzucato couldn't be here today to receive the award personally. So on behalf of her, I would say a few words. So firstly, I would like to briefly introduce Mariana, who is the founder and director of the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose at the UCL. And I guess I'm very well placed to represent Mariana today because I'm a non-economist, I'm a qualitative researcher, and I'm an immigrant. So I work on health innovation with Mariana, and our work recently has been the basis of the Labour opposition's policy in rethinking pharmaceutical innovation. So Mariana has made it not just her mission, but IAPP's mission to rethink economics. So the mission of our institute is to change how public value is imagined, practiced, and evaluated to tackle societal challenges, delivering economic growth that is innovation-led, sustainable, and inclusive. And indeed, like the wonderful panel here today has suggested, innovation doesn't just have a direction, it also have a rate. We need to ensure that the fruits of innovation should be distributed fairly and accessible by the public. And we need to make sure that there is sustainable finance to fund innovation, and innovation should be about connecting the central to the local, reimagining public spaces, reimagining how global issues connect with local residents. And if Mariana was here today, she would say something in the lines of a quote from Plato, that storytellers rule the world. And reimagining in economics would involve reimagining the narrative around how we talk about economics and think about economics. So Mariana created this wonderful poster at the beginning of the IPP. Economics should not be about talking about fixing markets, de-risking spaces, leveling the playing field, picking winners, outsourcing or measuring the cost-benefit of policies. It should be about co-creating and shaping market by different actors. It should be about welcoming uncertainty, tilting the market towards a certain direction, picking the willing, building capacity across sectors, and measuring dynamics spillovers. And so finally, without further ado, I want to deliver a personal quote from Mariana in recognition of this award.
Relying on technology, that's a
Indeed, that's a slight challenge. So this is from Mariana personally. Dark times need enlightened thinking. I'm honored to receive the prize alongside some luminary economists asking critical questions. To name a few, Steve encourages us to ask about the structure of our financial system. Kate encourages us to get real about both the analysis and implementation of a circular economy. Laura helps us to rethink macroeconomics, questioning the assumptions behind austerity. I hope all the runners-up for not the Nobel Award will become involved with our agenda at IIPP and to help us debate not only the rate of growth but its direction. This requires new theories, tools and practices. And on behalf of Mariana, I would like to thank Henry and the Mint very much again for the award.
Thank you very much, Henry. That's great. Brilliant. I think I'm still there. I thought the microphone lost us as well. I love Mariana's idea of the coalition of the willing, because that's what it's really about. People who are going to be part of the solutions, who are going to get together to make it happen. And that, I think, is a crucial idea to take away with us. With that, I'm going to hand back to our host, Mark.
Thank you so much, Henry. We're indebted to you, Henry, for creating this platform. And the best way that I think we can salute Henry is not necessarily with warm words, they're always welcome, but actually engagement with the Mint magazine. It's a fabulous website. It's a brilliant, obviously, magazine packed with fantastic material and ideas every month. Quarterly, that's exactly right. Not yet. Soon. That's right. Quarterly. And also economicpluralism.org, which is a fantastic resource as well. So the biggest thing is to engage with us on social media, Twitter. We've more or less been trending for the last few minutes. So the engagement on Twitter has been fantastic for tonight. And that's the best thing that you guys can do, is to support the platform. Come back in a year's time when it will be the 2020, not the Nobel Prize. We ultimately, you probably hope that the thing can sort of self-implode once the world is fixed and everything's groovy. You can retire. So really, this is for Henry's retirement. We must provoke change so he can sit on a beach. But ladies and gentlemen, the other thing to say is that's it. Mint magazine, economicpluralism.org. Those are the important platforms and locations that you need to be at. Do you stick around? We'll probably have a drink or something and a bit of a networking session. Steve, sir? Fantastic. Thank you, Steve. And on that note, thanks to Henry, the panel, thanks for you to coming. Thanks to everyone online for watching and voting, and most importantly to our first inaugural winner of Not the Nobel 2019, Mariana Mazzucato.